When I was a kid, we moved to this old house out in the country. The house had a basement and an attic. In the basement, there were pentagrams painted on the walls. I was always creeped out with the basement and remember seeing glowing eyes in the hole in the ceiling of the basement. One time, while in my room, I was doing my homework with my headphones on. I felt a hand hit my hair, and I saw my ponytail swing from one side to the other, from the corner of my eyes. And then my chair started shaking violently. There was nobody in my room, and I couldn't explain how that happened. I was 13 at the time, and it scared the shit out of me. I didn't tell my parents because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, and they would freak out and would make me pray and read the Bible. Another incident happened while I was home alone. Both my parents were at work at the time. I was in the bathroom brushing my hair when I heard my stepdad's voice very clearly say, "Hi, I'm home." And I heard the footsteps and his keys rattling and the back door slam shut. Thinking my stepdad was home, I came out of the bathroom, responding to what I thought was my stepdad. At first, I thought maybe he was hiding from me, so I started looking around the house for him. When I looked out the window, I saw the gate was still closed and no cars parked outside in our driveway, and the back door was still locked. I freaked out, but said in a loud voice, "I must be going crazy," thinking that if I ignore it, it won't bother me. I used to see black figures out of the corner of my eye, and when I would turn to look directly at it, there wouldn't be anything there. I used to hear a man's voice saying my name in a loud whisper in my ears. I've even heard that same voice saying my name while I was at work, and nobody was around me. One time, my sister came running in my room late at night, scared, wanting to sleep in my bed, because she said she saw a ghost. She said the ghost was of a woman wearing light-coloured dress and was pointing at her in the doorway of a room, and it vanished. Years after we moved from that house, I would have recurring dreams of that house, and it would always be about ghosts and weird stuff. I don't know what that's about, but that house was pretty creepy to live in. So I'm a college student, and all the residential areas on campus have a different name: Highland, Park, Historic, and North. I chose to live in the Historic District because it was the one with the most greenery. It was close to all of my classes, and my brother stayed in the same dorm when he went to my uni. I live on floor 3 of 3 at my dorm, and I noticed something odd really shortly after moving in. There's an intercom right on the wall at the foot of my bed. I inquired about it at the front desk, asking if it was hooked to the desk, or campus security, anything like that. The desk assistant had no clue what I was talking about and directed me to the most popular RA in the building. I asked him about the intercom, and he told me the story as follows. Back in the day, the rooms had intercoms that went to the basement. Not sure why the basement, but the basements of the historic dorms had closed after someone unalived themselves back in the day. There's also rumours that they connect to the bomb shelter under campus, but I don't know. I was aware of the bomb shelters. We have staircases that lead down at random spots all over campus, and you can even hear the pressure release from them about every half hour to hour. But this intercom thing spooked me, so I chose to ignore it. My roommate and I had pretty opposite schedules, so we were rarely in the room together. Weird stuff would happen to us though. I'd be working at my desk and hear a woman go, "Hello?" who I'd assume was my roommate or friend from down the hall, but I'd turn around and no one was there. My closet is about 2 feet from the intercom, and sometimes I'd hear the doorknob turn. My roommate would text me, asking if I forgot my keys and was knocking on the door. There was even a time where we were both in the room and a huge bang hit the door. We freaked out, looked through the peephole, but saw no one. We slowly opened the door to look down the hall, and because we're in the centre, there isn't anywhere to run. But no one would be there. My roommate broke her leg a month into the school year and had to drop out, leaving me on my own. These weird occurrences would happen, so I spent a lot of time in my friend's room, only ever sleeping in mine. Eventually, we migrated to hanging out in my room, but my friends would always comment how bad the energy was. It seemed to subside after a bit, but there are still some days I walk in and it's absolutely draining in there. There have been instances when my boyfriend and I are about to fall asleep and he'll say, "What do you mean?" And I'm confused about what he's talking about and he'll go, "Didn't you just say that?" Some weird clicking, almost like a telegraph, started coming from the intercom around October. I asked the RA, but he assured me the intercom was disconnected. I started making more friends, meaning I was in more rooms in my building, and the more time I spent elsewhere, the more I realised my room is the only room with an intercom. I lost my dad just a couple of weeks ago, and I had all of these. Just 2 weeks before his passing, I visited him, and we had a big family get-together with dinner. My dad and I had a difficult relationship in some ways, because he liked to keep pretty isolated, or maybe I didn't visit him enough. I'm not sure of which now. Anyway, at this visit, he had gotten a haircut and a shave, and he looked healthier and more presentable than he had in at least 2 years. I brought a dish I was sure he'd have nothing to do with, and he ate with me and said how delicious it was. I put on the Eagles and we sang "Take It Easy." At the end of the night, he let me hug and kiss him goodbye, which he's never done in his life. I told my dad I was moving to the coast to be near the ocean. He asked if he could see me when I got there, as he had never been to the ocean. I promised he could, despite my shock at the idea he would even come. And we spent time dreaming of how wonderful it was going to be when he came. Afterward, my husband said it was the best visit we ever had with Dad. It was. I was really looking forward to seeing him on his birthday, November 2nd, not knowing I would not get the chance to ever see him again, losing him 2 days beforehand. Later in the week, my husband and I went for a walk, and he asked why I cared so much to research my family tree. I told him how a couple years back, I had finally done my dad's tree, and all the things I learned, including the very interesting story I shared with my husband about how my simple father was actually a talented musician, and I literally sang the only song I ever remember him writing as we walked. It was about one of the last prisoners executed at the Don jail, who I'm pretty sure Dad named me after. It's a sad song about the father of the prisoner attending and mourning his son's hanging. My husband got very quiet and noted how unusually deep and somber the conversation had turned. I agreed, but it felt right to talk about at the time. A week later, my daughter said that my dad had tried to call her, but she was unavailable. I don't think he's ever tried to call her before, so I tried to call him back, but his number came up out of service. I have no explanation for how this occurred within 30 minutes of him calling my daughter. I had a bad feeling, so I tried to call my mom, who was now his ex-wife, who he was still good friends with and lived close by. No answer. I told myself to let it go and stop worrying. Early Halloween morning, my husband was up late as usual, working on some papers at a local cafe. I woke up at 12:24 a.m. and called him anxious and asking where he was and when he'd be back. He accused me of behaving strangely and said he was where he always was and would be back soon. I woke again at 1:50 a.m. after what could be described as a panic and called him again to discover he was downstairs in our house. I was disoriented and he accused me again of acting very weird. I wrote it off and went to sleep. Barely remember anything of it by morning. This has never happened. The following day, I had scheduled off work for an appointment, which turned out to be very lucky, because I was still in bed instead of being at my desk 90 minutes away, where I normally would have been when my brother called and told me Dad had died the night before. I left quickly with my husband to go where Dad and my family live. In the car, I started crying. My husband gently asked what I was thinking about. I said, "When I woke up and I called you last night, I can already tell you, that's when he went." I was right. We got there and learned Dad died at 12:25 a.m. Halloween morning. My mom divorced my dad over 30 years ago. He never did divorce her and never loved another. He should have died on his apartment floor alone, but she came to visit him that afternoon and insisted on bringing him to the hospital after seeing he was unwell. He was admitted and stabilized after arrhythmia. She told him she loved him, and she would let us know he was in the hospital, and that she would visit in the morning. That wily old bird passed away just a couple of minutes after the love of his life left his bedside, and I'm certain that was deliberate. For the next several days, Take It Easy played on a continuous loop in my head. I thought I was going insane, and I couldn't make it stop. After the funeral, after my eulogy, at the end of which I played Take It Easy, it definitely did. I had spent the days asking for a sign from Dad that he was okay. I now believe this endless repetitive music in my head was his goodbye to me. I'm still going to move next to the ocean, Dad, and when I do, promise I'll take you with me. I need help identifying an event that I cannot find any info on. 20 years ago, I was sleeping beside my husband and I woke up. As I was turning over, I looked over my husband's shoulder and saw a woman standing in the bedroom doorway, staring at my husband intently with curiosity. She then began moving toward him. She had no idea I was watching her. When she began walking towards him, I got angry and I was going to launch myself over him and tackle her, but she was too far away. And I was concerned I would wake husband and he would sit up suddenly, causing me to hurt him. Instead, I turned over, got out of bed. By the time I got to the end of the bed, she was gone, just vanished. This was no common intruder. She was approximately 5 feet tall, very slim, but with a definite female figure, around 100 pounds. She wasn't clothed, but looked like a solid silhouette, or as if head to toe in a skin-tight black bodysuit. She didn't have hair on her silhouette. Why can I describe her so well? First, she was less than 12 or 13 feet from me. Secondly, this was not the first time seeing the paranormal, so no shock or fear. But although I do not mind paranormal encounters, I do not let them come near my husband. Can anyone give any hints as to what she was? I like to go charity shopping a lot. You can find amazing things there for even better prices. In my most recent shop, I found a really cute doll. I saw it and knew I wanted it as it was so cute. For context, I've always been 50-50 when believing in the supernatural. I've always been fond of the concept, especially in horror-related media. I've also always understood the possibility of how it came to be. I've also understood how unlikely it is too. But since I've got this doll, I've noticed whistling from behind me whenever the doll has been in the same room. Despite being in the back bedroom and not often hearing stuff from the streets, I play it off as someone outside whistling. I have auditory processing issues and often have a hard time navigating where sound is coming from. I'm bringing this up now as something else has happened. I was showering and usually leave the door slightly open if I'm home alone, as my dogs always find some way to misbehave, and that way I can keep a better eye on them. My dogs started barking uncontrollably, and I thought it was someone outside. I couldn't stop them from barking, and my father was planning on ordering me food, so I ended my shower to check the door. When I got out, I noticed my dog nervously barking at my bedroom door, where my doll is being kept until I go to my mother's. I decided to go into my room and check it out. Usually, my dogs willingly run into my room and get comfy on my bed or chew what they can find. They wouldn't. They both stood there barking. I'm well aware that animals are deemed to be a lot more sensitive towards the supernatural and aware of my dog's behaviour enough to know that this was unusual. That's why I made this post. I'm looking for advice or answers. If it is somehow haunted, I want to keep it and understand it, unless it's an unkind entity. I live in Louisiana. It was about 2 years ago in mid-November. Me age 14 at the time, my younger sibling age 12, and younger cousin age 13 were hanging out over the weekend. Our mother had hit a tree early that week down their driveway. We asked him to show us. It was probably 9:30 p.m. I grab my phone and we walk out the door. We're walking down the hill as he was telling us about how our mother had hit a tree from being intoxicated that night a week ago. Our cousin was showing us what tree she hit and the story she had told them. He pauses. Everything appears silent. No crickets, frogs, nothing. Our phone batteries drain and our lights turn off. My phone at 20%, however, it did not die. It just powered itself off. My sister's, which was at 30%, was now dead. My cousin didn't have a phone at this time, but he had a flashlight which the batteries were now dead in. We all look at each other, dead in the eyes, only being able to see each other from the moonlight illuminating our faces. We look away into the forest. Then we hear screeches and something coming at us on all fours. They bucket in the dark as I fumble to turn my light on. And so I do, a few moments later. I'm running up the hill as I hear heavy panting, occasional screeches, as this creature is picking up its speed. They claim to just hear screeches the whole way that night. We all make it back unharmed, out of breath and alive. I'm now 16 and wonder and talk about what we encountered that day. Needless to say, we don't go outside after dark anymore. Okay, I need some help. Anybody out there that knows what this could have done this? It's 8:30 p.m. in the northern United States, and it's very dark out. I heard a strange noise coming from outside because my window was open. It sounded like a baby crying, but my mom described it as somebody groaning, but it didn't sound quite right. It was almost like an uncanny valley, but audio. When I went downstairs to ask who made that noise, my mom and brother were standing outside on the deck, door wide open, looking terrified. My brother went back inside and I went outside with my mom to watch my dog. She looked really scared, shaking, leg up, tail between her legs, staring directly across the street. She didn't move for 7 minutes, just staring. After the initial noise, somebody shouted, "Shut up!" And that's when we knew it wasn't just us. Suddenly, a bunch of dogs started barking, but then abruptly stopped after a couple minutes. Then, as if something was trying to fit in, a dog started barking. 3 barks. It sounded like a dog, but it also didn't. It sounded very obviously imitated, and it also sounded like it was coming from just across the fence, but nothing was there. We all went inside and started locking every door and every window, closing all the blinds. My mom told us she was going to protect us no matter what. My brother is sleeping with my dad tonight. I'm sleeping with my window closed and locked. Can somebody please tell me what they think it could be so I could do some research? I need to know what I'm up against. When I was like 5 or 6 years old, my grandparents always picked me up from school and brought me back to their apartment due to my parents' work schedule. My mum would come pick me up from their apartment after work then. The whole experience began with a nightmare. It could have been my first nightmare in my life, as I'm always able to control my dreams, and that was the first time I couldn't, and it was scary. In the nightmare, I was lying on an old bed in a very dim room with weird green light. Someone that looked like my grandma, but didn't feel like her, approached the bed and sat next to me. I couldn't move at all. Then the grandma said, "I can't sleep tonight because the pillows are poisoned." And then I woke up, uncomfortably and sweating. The next day, my grandparents picked me up from school as usual. I was usually closer with grandma, but because of the nightmare, I chose to play with my grandpa in the living room. Grandma watched us play for a while, and then she went into work in the kitchen. The kitchen is at the end of a narrow, long corridor, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear the on and off running water in the sink and the clanging of pots and plates. After a while, Grandpa said he had to use the bathroom, which is next to the kitchen and the corridor. I don't know. Although Grandma wasn't in the living room anymore, I was still afraid to be left there alone. So I begged Grandpa to let me follow him into the bathroom, which of course he refused. Still, I followed him to the bathroom and tried to block him from closing the door by pushing against the door, and one of my feet was on the wall of the other side of the corridor for support. So my whole body was literally blocking the kitchen entrance, and I could see Grandma washing something in the sink in the corner of my eye. She was actually just 3 steps away from me. After a while of back and forth in the door battle with me, Grandpa got annoyed and kind of shouted, "I don't understand. What are you scared of? Grandma's in the living room. You won't be left alone." I was so baffled at that point, I let go of the door. Grandpa closed it. I was scared of Grandma, who's just steps away from me, so I retreated back to the living room, which she was indeed in, folding laundry on the couch. I ran into their bedroom and wrapped myself onto the duvets until my mum came to pick me up. What confused me is, why had Grandpa said Grandma was in the living room when it was just the 2 of us playing there right before he had to use the bathroom? It's a small room. I couldn't possibly ignore another human there. I'm not sure if this is an actual paranormal incident, or someone playing a super elaborate trick on me. I collect skulls and skull art. Think of the Day of the Dead type skulls. I left my door open for my best friend to come in and watch the football game while I was gone, because he had a gap with work and it was close to my house. He mentioned, "I like the new skull." My dad had bought me one recently, so I just figured that was it. When I walked in, I noticed on my shelf a skull I had never seen. I said, "Did you get me that?" He said, "I thought you said your dad got it for you." I had never bought that skull. I looked around my house instantly because the door was open. Called everyone who it could possibly be. Everyone swears it's not them, and I'm not friends with the type of people that would prank me like that. So we started to think someone came in because the door was open, and we cleared the house. My desk is turned sideways in my office, so a new skull on my desk is turned sideways. Nothing else is taken. If they wanted to steal from me, they could have taken anything, but I've noticed nothing gone. The next day, I put it outside. 2 of my friends confirmed and watched me put it outside because I didn't want it in my house. I then had to drive to my friend 2 hours up north. When I get back, I have my friend come in with me because I'm a little scared. We get back and it's literally on top of my shelf. I'm extremely scared now. I called my 2 friends that were with me and they confirmed they didn't put it up there. My desk was also moved again. I had my dad and brother come over. My friends stayed the night. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do. If it's a person, why are they moving the desk to a weird spot? If it's someone, why aren't they stealing? I'm going to get some cameras today. The maybe more weird thing is, why move the desk? Why would a person pull my desk away from the wall, and that alone? I'm trying to be very logical about this, but I have no answers and don't want to seem crazy to my friends. I'm agnostic and pretty skeptical. I don't believe in anything paranormal, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and at the time of the story, it was during the late 80s, early 90s, mid-satanic panic era. There were a lot of circulated rumours about this or that being demonic, and you had to be careful about what you brought into your house, lest you invite demons into your home. So I guess they're like vampires or bedbugs. Also, lots of urban legend stories, a lot of them involving Smurfs, like Smurf wallpaper stomping newborns to death in their sleep and the like. Important to understand is that JWs don't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything else, but rather than discount the stories themselves altogether, they merely blame them on bored, vindictive demons fucking with us because they've been banished to Earth. So yeah, basically, if there was a JW Scooby-Doo cartoon, every ending would be the same. Now let's see who's really behind this, as they'd removed the rubber alien mask, the glowing ghost sheet, the dinosaur fossil. I knew it, just a regular old demon. Anyway, around 9 or 10 years old, I started being left home alone. Big family, so it didn't happen much. But when it did, I started noticing things from the corner of my eye. around the edges of darkened corners. Only a couple of times did I notice a discernible shape, and it looked like this stuffed toy someone in the house had recently gotten. Black-furred, big-nosed, kind of goofy yet terrifying in the right context. I guess think Five Nights at Freddy's style. Sometimes I'd get so freaked out, I'd bolt out of the house with barely a jacket or shoes on, and sit outside my house in the winter. I can't remember what excuse I gave when my family came home and found me shivering on the stoop, but I didn't tell them the truth. I even started to join my mom on painfully boring errands. Kids nowadays will likely fail to understand what hours of errands at the hair salon, dry cleaners, the bank, or Joann's Fabrics is like without cell phones or Nintendo Switches. At best, we had Tiger handheld games, which were typically less fun than simply staring at your hands. But I enjoyed it all rather than be left alone with the demons. In retrospect, all of this is easily dismissed. Young mind crammed full of the idea that the world is teeming with demons out to get him is left alone for the first time in his life, and his mind conjures demons out of flickering shadows. But it's what comes next I can never hand-wave away quite so easily. I'm about 11ish, I think, and I lost one of my baby teeth. Maybe my last one. I don't remember, but it's a molar. Jehovah's Witnesses famously don't celebrate anything, but there were actually a few things that weren't forbidden. I just don't remember if we did the tooth fairy thing. I mean, I know there was no pretense of a fairy, just my mom taking my tooth and giving me $1. But I know I didn't get $1 for this last one. Maybe it was too late in the game, being the last wish tooth and being the youngest of 8 kids. The kid tooth market was now incredibly saturated. She probably had a coffee can full. Technically, she might even qualified as an ivory dealer. So I go to bed that night, and I have an oddly specific memory of putting my tooth on my bedside table on the metal base of my lamp. I wake up sometime during the night, and it's a full, deep, silent, scary night. Not, my parents are still awake and I can hear them watching MASH in the living room at night. It's one of those half awakes, where your dreams are still a vivid reality, and you can effortlessly step back into them. I'm instantly aware of a large bluish-white glowing presence at the end of my bed. It's an angel, with its back to me, focused on something else. Which is odd, in and of itself, as the only thing in that part of my room of interest was my Dick Tracy action figures. So hopefully he was bringing me the blank figure, because I couldn't find that shit anywhere. I don't remember I could move, but I didn't. I was scared, but in oddly detached, non-panicky sort of way. He became aware of me and looked back, and not in a malevolent way, but not kindly either. It was more of a cold, slightly sneering indifference. Then I just fell back asleep. Which was obviously odd. Had it been someone innocuous like my mom in my room at 3 a.m, I doubt I'd have drifted back off so quickly. Let alone a potentially fallen angel rooting through my collectibles. I loved those Dick Tracy toys, and I was very paranoid and protective about losing the Tommy guns on those things. It happened to a JW pal of mine. His mom took all their weapons, and he was left with a bunch of squat, Lego grip-handed, suited old men with stupid hats. And who wants to play with that? But I digress again. Then I just awoke in the morning, but I didn't immediately remember the previous night's visitor. I woke just like any other morning, sat up, but then paused my crooked Y stretching as my eyes rested on my molar. It was still on the lamp base, but it had been expertly cut in half. It was perfectly smooth, like it had been done with a laser, and the other half was gone. I didn't immediately suspect my mother. Firstly, I doubted she had access to that level of technology, and second, if it was her, then where was my 50 cents? Only then did I recall the previous night's events, and as you can imagine, it shook me up. I mean, there were the spooky paranormal aspects that would scare anyone, but atop all that was the sheer randomness of it. Nothing added up to anything. It was just an absolute casserole of nonsense. Now, had the demon or angel burnt a cockeyed 666 on my wall and left a steaming cauldron stuffed with smirch merchandise, then okay, sure, I'd have been terrified, but at least it would have been on brand and fallen neatly into place with everything else I knew. But what the fuck did he want with half my tooth? I snatched up my half-tooth and went to find my mother, not really expecting answers, but at least wanting someone else to acknowledge and share in this fucked up situation. When I found her, I didn't editorialize or bring up any of the angel business, just handed it over with a, "Hey, look what happened to my tooth when I was asleep." She examined it closely, but far too briefly, and handed it back with something like, "Huh, that's kind of weird, hey? Where's your father? Tell him breakfast is ready." Her lack of astonishment felt suspect. I went looking for my dad with the inner monologue of a TV detective. "No, I don't think she did it, but she's no more than she's telling us." I didn't even bring it up to my dad, as my relationship with him was fraught, and it felt unwise to do so. More than likely, I'd have been blamed for it in some way, and I'd be interrogated about my cola consumption. So I sat on this info. I think I tried to bring it up casually with my mom again later, but again got nothing. A week or so later, it was missing from my dresser. I thought I might have knocked it off or something, and it'd show up eventually, but it never did. Shortly after this incident, we moved to a new house, and I never saw the flickering shadow demons again. I never had any more issues with being left alone in the house. As a skeptical adult looking back, I can say, look, I turned 12. I got over my fear of being home alone, and maybe I conjured the angel memory from nothing after that tooth incident. But that doesn't explain the tooth, and I remember the tooth. I could feel myself grasping for plausible scenarios. Maybe there's some medical test that requires an inner tooth test, so my parents took it. But then why not just tell me? Why return the other half? That's the whole issue with the incident, as even if you accept the existence of angels, demons, ghosts, it doesn't really explain anything meaningful. So yeah, that's it. I don't think about it often, but when I do, it still bothers me. Why are these things so weird? I've dealt with sleep paralysis for about 15 years now, on and off. At first they were terrifying, but they seem to happen less and less throughout the years. Lately, I've been going through some hard times, and last night I fell asleep with my partner in our regular position, at the head of the bed, no TV on. I wake up to us sleeping on the foot of the bed, almost as if watching a movie together, but he's on his back, arms behind his head, and I'm on my stomach, with my arms crossed under supporting my head. What woke me up was 2 taps on the bed near our heads. Immediately, I knew this was sleep paralysis. I tried to close my eyes and go back to sleep before giving it any more attention. When I did, something quickly jerked my hair bun upwards, and the fear came on. I tried to move but could only wiggle my fingers, which were near my partner's underarms. I tickled his underarm, and when he woke up and looked around, suddenly I also woke up, and we were both back at the head of the bed like normal, except he was still sleeping. So I tucked my leg under his and went back to sleep. So here are some things I've been thinking about. I've lately had sort of a second awakening to my spiritual side, and have used stones to meditate, and also to ground myself when I feel too spacey or emotional. I wonder if these things have brought me sort of a balance to put sleep paralysis in its proper place before the terror sets in. I didn't even really see a demon this time, so that helped, but I was immediately aware of the surroundings and the dream state, which is something that is usually elusive during sleep paralysis. What kind of worries me is that I've never been physically touched by whatever is watching me during sleep paralysis. I've been held down by but an invisible force. This time, it pulled my hair. Has anyone had any experience with sleep paralysis after starting a meditative journey, or just going through a rough time? And how is it different from past experiences? I stepped out of my apartment into the stairwell one night. To get a picture of it in your head, the stairs were red and metal, poorly painted and horribly maintained. The lights were bright white, constantly buzzing, and the walls were damp. I turned to go to the door. That's when I saw him. A man wearing a navy blue overcoat that had very apparent wet spots on it, which was the first thing that threw me off, since we hadn't had rain in weeks. The other thing that threw me off was how he smoked his cigarette. Smoke went in, but didn't come out. He held the cigarette in his mouth, gripping it as if it'd fall out of his mouth otherwise. He sat on a step that went up to the main door. I watched him take a long drag, and I watched him breathe out nothing. The crackling of the cigarette was so loud, like it had been amplified by 1,000. I looked closer at him and noticed his mouth was wide open. The crackle of the cigarette rang loud in the stairwell when I realised he wasn't holding it up to his lips anymore. It was in his hand, to his side. I walked down the stairs towards him. As soon as I took a step, the air went dead silent. The rushing of the nearby river ceased, and the buzzing of the lights did too. I was fucking terrified, but I kept walking. I walked as fast as my feet could carry me, all the while praying he wasn't going to reach for a knife or anything. He didn't. He didn't reach for anything. For some reason, he allowed me to get uncomfortably close before he raised his arm up, held the cigarette to his mouth, and lit it. He was no longer moving and stood as still as a statue in the light of the white fluorescent bulbs above him. He didn't take a drag or even exhale, and just sat there as if he was waiting for something. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I watched him sit there until his cigarette was almost completely smoked out. He was still and silent. I woke up back at my door, hands shaking and gripping the doorknob. I tried to shake it off as just a bad daydream, because that's what it felt like. Too vivid to be a daydream, but too hazy to be real. I was about to open my door, and as I turned the handle, the air went dead silent again. I took my hand off the doorknob and the sound immediately came back. I never tried to open my door without listening to that dead silence now. It's up to you if you want to believe me or not. A lot of people look at me with a sort of pity when I tell them. They don't call me mad, but it's apparent what they're thinking. In 4th grade, I found a book about holding seances and the occult in the elementary school library. Coming from a semi-conservative Christian household, of course I was curious and checked it out, quickly hiding it deep in my backpack. And once I was home, taking it out in my room and stashing the book under my mattress. That night, I started reading a bit and saw there were directions to summon someone who died in a mirror and be able to talk to them. Well, the only person I knew who had passed was my great-grandfather, and maybe part of me knew nothing would really happen. Jesus wouldn't let anything bad get me, right? I'd take the book into the bathroom and start to follow the directions laid out. I honestly don't remember what they were, but I sure as hell remember what happened next. I remember the mirror getting foggy, then a face. It was my great-grandfather, but twisted. Emaciated and grey and frightening. Every hair on my body stood on end as the image started to open its mouth. But before it said anything, I grabbed the book and bolted out of the bathroom, quickly slamming the door and going to hide in my bed. As an adult looking back, I can't help but doubt my own story. I was a child. I had an active imagination. Memories could be faulty. I do remember the absolute terror. The literal fear of God was put in me. I don't know if it really was a demon or my papa or whatever else it could have been. You can't really summon the dead in your own bathroom mirror, can you? Either way, that damn book went to the library the next day. Happened to me and a small group of friends. When we were younger, we watched Battleships. I didn't really like the movie, but we enjoyed each other's company and just wanted to have reasons to hang out together. Halfway through the movie, a friend of mine sitting next to me was smiling a little too sheepishly while hugging her legs, which she brought onto the chair. I was curious, mouthed, "What?" My friend and other friends who were in it pointed in front. I looked in front. There's nothing significant going on in front of us. The theatre wasn't packed. There were a lot of empty seats. The rows in front of us were all empty except a couple that decided to sit in the row directly in front of mine. They were sitting a few seats away from my left and a row in front of me. I looked at them and there was nothing funny going on. I looked back at my friend who was sitting on my right, motioning the "huh? What?" gestures. They kept pointing in the general vicinity in front of my head. Failing to see anything repeatedly, my friend told me in a hushed voice, "The chair! Look at the chair!" I looked at the chair that was slightly haphazard in front of my friend. It was shaking, as if someone was either kicking the chair from behind rapidly, or as if someone sat in the chair and was rocking back and forth in the chair. I'm normally a scaredy cat when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I had to know. So I lurched forward and looked down towards the row. I saw nothing. I just saw all the rows of chairs and saw nothing sitting in that chair. I saw no reason for the chair to behave the way it was. I did see a carton of popcorn. I stared and saw nothing, just the chair shaking. All the adjacent chairs were not shaking. Everything else was still as it should be. I laughed in disbelief. My friends asked me, did I see anything? I said nothing. Nothing at all, and we just watched the movie to distract ourselves. We had an interesting post-movie chat, some additional occulty info. In Southeast Asian countries, people tend to be superstitious. It's normal for movie theatres to block entire front rows in the theatres. Those who are superstitious would say they're reserved for visitors who also want to watch. The more sceptical would say it's to avoid needing to clean more rows when there's less customers. For context, my dad grew up on dairy farms with his parents, who worked for a guy who owned multiple farms. So they would hop around to different farms and manage them, so to speak. Also, we live in Australia. Anyway, while my dad was in his late teens to early 20s, they lived in this house that eventually became known as the spooky house to him and his parents, and this is what they experienced while living there. The house was known to have a very foreboding feeling to it, like something was always off and you couldn't put your finger on it. Floor was made out of old wood that had little notches in it, and Nan put little stoppers in them to fill the holes. A lot of the time, they would wake up in the morning and find that all of the stoppers were pushed up from underneath the house. Dad said they had these giant-ass hippie beads hanging in the doorways, so big and heavy that it would have to be a big gust of wind to move them. He lost count of how many times he would get up early for work or such and find them swaying, like someone walked through them, but when he checked the bedrooms, everyone was asleep. I remember Dad telling me that it slowly got worse over the time, like the house didn't want them there or something. At one point, Nan contacted a psychic to see if they could make it better or calm it down. Well, the psychic wouldn't even get out of a car and come up the driveway, absolutely refused to come inside the house. Nan was left flabbergasted and asked what she could do. The psychic told her to move house and drove off. Dad said not long after these things would start talking the house. To this day, he has no idea what they were, and he doesn't really want to know. Nan would come out in the morning, find that the grass was pressed down or trampled around the house, especially where the windows are. Her peg basket on the clothesline would be ripped to shreds, and bits of it spread around. Dad said he would get the shits because she had to keep buying new ones. It started to get more serious when my dad would be woken up by scratching at his window on the outside. He was always too scared to look back at it because he knew whatever it was staring right back at him while scratching the window. They would check in the morning to find that the paint had been scratched off the house at around human height and grass flattened. At one point, while his dad was out working a few paddocks over, Nan came in and woke Dad up, and together they huddled in his bedroom, waiting for daylight as the thing stalked around the outside of the house. Speaking of, it stalked Dad once too. He was walking from the house to his dad, a few paddocks over to help with the cows, about 4 a.m.-ish. It was cold and there was frost on the grass. As Dad was walking, he could hear a crunch, crunch coming behind him. So he stopped and it stopped too. Dad was like, huh? And started walking again, and so did it. Again, Dad stopped again, and it stopped. Now starting to get freaked out, Dad started to pick up the pace and he stopped again. Only this time it didn't stop, but started to come right at Dad. Dad fucking bolted. Ran over 2 paddocks and cleared the fences. Didn't stop till he reached his dad's side. Whenever Dad's parents left for a couple of days and he had the place to himself, Dad would host massive parties with his friends. They had the run of the house and could sleep wherever they wanted, but all of them always ended up huddling up in one room, where they go to sleep. One time, it was just Dad and his cousin over. They played a game of pool and drank. At one point around midnight, the both of them were sitting around and heavily drinking. A dark figure appeared and said, "Go to bed." Dad said he was pissed drunk and thought, why the hell not? And they went to bed. The next morning they woke up to find the game of pool that was left unfinished put away, and his cousin asked who that person was that was standing over their beds watching them sleeping. But Dad didn't remember that part. I will say though, that Dad and his parents moved out and someone else eventually moved in. Not long after that, the house burned down. Dad didn't know what caused the fire, but he was sure as fuck happy about it. My cousin went to college at SCAD in Savannah. At the end of her first year, my aunt and I went to help pack her up, move stuff into storage for the next year, etc. Both of them went to grab lunch, and since I wasn't hungry, I stayed behind to keep working. We were asked to deconstruct the beds if they'd been bunked, and I had put the pins from that on a dresser to take back to the RA later. And I went back to cleaning the bathroom area. I heard a loud ping behind me, and one of the pins had rolled off the dresser. Okay, no problem. I picked it up and put it with its mate, and went back to the sink. I heard a ping again, and one had fallen again. Annoyed at myself, I picked it back up and put it with the other, and moved them vertically so it couldn't roll off again. I turned around and took one step toward the sink, and ping! Suddenly, I got really cold, nauseous, and felt like I was being watched. But I shook it off and went to pick the pin again. I grabbed it and the other pin and put them in an empty cup on the dresser. I barely turned around when I heard the ping and a giggle. I was just standing there, absolutely frozen to the spot, when my aunt and cousin walked in with their lunch. Both of them looked at me and my aunt said, "What's wrong, hun? You're white as a sheet." And my cousin goes, "Ugh, was it the ghosts?" And I said, "What fucking ghosts?" Apparently, it's well known that the dorm is haunted as fuck. I guess my cousin's roommate moved out because the ghost was freaking her out. She'd gotten a preacher in to bless the room and expel the ghost, and my cousin said it just made the ghost mad. I guess the girl's stuff went missing all the time, and they'd come home from class, and just that girl's stuff would be pulled out of the dressers and emptied on the floor. I believe that for a number of years my family home, built in the 1960s by my grandparents from my father's side, has been haunted by several different paranormal entities over the course of decades, just because of major differences between the happenings themselves. It's a 2-story house, with my parents and I sleeping on the second floor, and my sister and grandparents sleeping on the first floor. For me, however, this began around 15 years ago. My older sister was the first one afflicted. In a short span of time, she began having constant sleep paralysis experiences, which I know aren't scientifically related to anything paranormal. But the folklore of my country relates them to a specific entity, known as a dark man, for lack of a better translation to English. What you might call a sleep paralysis demon, often thought of as a mischievous and perhaps evil spirit behind it. At first, nothing was thought of it, but these became so frequent it was starting to weird my parents out, as well as myself and my sister. Some more things started happening in addition to this, like her waking up in the middle of the night with something invisible pulling on her long hair, causing her to freak out and call out for Grandma, who with lightning speed ran over with a bottle of holy water, sprayed the place and prayed with my sister. Another time this happened, whatever was playing with her hair appeared to blow air into her face, freaking her out even more. The most shocking thing during the beginning of these happenings came when my mother, my sister and I were all in our living room watching TV. When suddenly, from a fully awake state, my sister shifted into the state of sleep paralysis. It took a couple of seconds for my mum and me to realise what was happening, when we noticed her shaking with her eyes open on the sofa, struggling to let out a sound. When she finally woke up, she let out a blood-curdling scream, crying and yelling at Mom and me, "It got me! It got me! Why didn't you help me?" She was visibly shaken and pale. My grandma arrived, of course, with her usual remedy, and even my father, a skeptic, walked out of my parents' bedroom, freaked out by her screams. My grandma remembered that in the local law, if a person wants to be protected from the dark man, a piece of clothing from the person's father needs to be placed on them, serving as a shield. So we tied my father's belt around her waist, and she went to sleep in my room, as she usually did when things like this happened. Still distraught and frightened, she asked me to get her a glass of water, so I went to get some in a plastic cup from the water dispenser and give it to her. As my mom was still in the living room, and my bedroom door, as well as my parents' bedroom door, were open, we all witnessed this next part. As I approached my bedroom door, the plastic cup practically exploded in my hand, splitting on all sides, water bursting out of my hand. My mom got up immediately and came over, everyone looking in shock, absolutely speechless. My dad first thought that I just dropped the cup, if I remember correctly, but on closer inspection, the cup was torn all around in perfectly straight lines, almost as if someone cut it with a scalpel. Safe to say, not much sleeping had done that night. Since that night, my mother and I had begun experiencing sleep paralysis. For her just a couple of times, and for me, until this very day. Also, nightly noises started appearing in our house, different from the house settling. Moving chairs, clanking dishware, etc., mainly on the second floor, and especially when we weren't home. At one point, my grandma even searched the second floor, suspecting a burglary, as she heard the old wardrobe in my parents' room open, in addition to the moving chairs. But when she reached the room, the wardrobe was open, but no one was there. These incidents prompted my sister to visit our local priest. After explaining the situation, the happenings and the nature of the haunting, the priest concluded that a lost spirit inhabiting our home was for some reason reaching out to my sister, wanting to become known. My sister was a little relieved after this, knowing that the spirit meant no harm. She even named the spirit Samuel. Well, now it was time to figure out what or who the hell Samuel actually was. There were a couple of theories. The first one concerned when my grandma was a little girl. On her way home from school, she had to pass through a cemetery every day, and one day she saw pretty flowers on a grave. She picked them and brought them home without telling anyone. That very night, she woke up to an invisible force grabbing her by the leg, trying to drag her out of bed. She felt as if she knew that whatever was dragging her wanted those flowers back. She woke her parents up, and her mother said the same thing, and they threw or returned the flowers the next morning. From that day on, she knew not to take anything from a graveyard ever again. It could have been that this entity remained attached to her and moved with her from a childhood home to our house when her and Grandpa split up, since it was only a couple of houses next door. The second one was that the ghost was possibly my grandma's father, my great-grandpa, who I hadn't ever met. This was thought because before he died, he said to my grandma, "If I'm gone, and you ever hear something moving in the attic, know that it's me." Coincidentally, the attic eventually became the second floor of the house, where most of the noises and the cup incident happened. It's also worth noting that my sister and I shared my room before she moved downstairs, so it could be connected somehow. I truly don't know. Other incidents soon followed. My mother once felt a strong press on her upper body when she was nearly sleeping, and thinking Dad put his arm around her with his full weight, she asked him to move the arm. After she got no response, she asked again, complaining that it was hard to breathe. She eventually had enough to the point of crying and yelled at him to stop, only to realise he wasn't even turned towards her in bed. He was turned to the other side and woke up, wondering why she was screaming. She still remembered this vividly, and it frightens her to this day. I remember one night I was playing PS2 games very late, and had gone to bed without realising I forgot to turn it off, and my LED light-up joystick remained plugged in. I woke up in the middle of the night and the TV was off, but thank God, the PC was still working and the joystick was glowing. I couldn't stand the darkness with all this shit going on. I remember looking at the PS2 and the light when suddenly the goddamn joystick unplugs itself, and in an instant, total darkness and panic in the room. I wake up and run to the light switch, which remained turned on the entire night. This was soon followed by my dumbass, once again late at night, watching TV in the living room. The stairs are connected to our second floor at the very beginning of the living room, and are separated by a thin metal strip from the living room floor. In total darkness, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. I yell out to my sister, believing she's going upstairs for a drink. As I get no response, I realise that there isn't a chance in hell that my sister would be coming up the stairs without turning the light on, as she never sleeps with the light off since this shit started happening, to this very day, and she's almost 30 years old. I sit up on the sofa frozen, listening to each footstep as it comes closer to the top of the stairs. Finally, I hear the metal strip on top of the stairs clanking, as if someone stepped on it, and I run for the hills, or should I say, my parents' bedroom door, frantically banging on it and screaming for them to let me in. I slept in their room for the rest of the night. The most bizarre thing during that first round of hauntings happened during broad daylight, and it's truly unexplainable in every way. My grandpa, grandma, sister and I were all heading next door to my aunt's house that afternoon, and my grandparents went before us as I was still doing something in my room, and my sister was in the bathroom. It was always practice at our home that the last person to leave takes the key from the inside of the front door and locks it up before heading out. So I run out of the house, telling my sister that I'm going, and she replies that she won't be far behind. I close the door behind me, and my sister tries to come out of the house maybe half a minute after me. She reaches for the door handle and realises that the door is locked. The goddamn house was locked from the inside after I left, and she remained the only person in there, meaning nobody was there to lock it. She unlocked it as fast as she could and ran out after telling me that someone had locked her inside. We told everybody. We checked the locks, tried to reproduce this, but it was impossible. The key had to be turned 6 times for the door to be locked. This was the last major thing from that first round, I believe. It was followed by mostly noises, which we learned to live with and accepted, as my sister accepted this Samuel, and truly no more incidents happened for a long time. At first we didn't spread a word of this outside family and family friends, but when some time passed, I told my classmates about this, and one of them actually stayed the night after my birthday, as he was intrigued by the noises and wanted to hear it for himself. My sister knew this and actually tried to pull a prank on us by knocking at our door late at night, after the party, and he and my other friend, who was also sleeping over, got scared shitless, so my sister revealed herself. But the next time it happened, a couple hours later, my friend woke me up to say something was knocking out there again. I opened the door, but this time there was nobody out there. My sister was in her room fast asleep. He kept asking me what the hell was that, and I just couldn't give him an answer. I was scared too, but I was used to it. He never slept over again, and tells his story a lot, as well as others who have slept there. I'm a very down-to-earth person and still convinced there must be some rational explanation, but the following happened to me. There was a small guest room in my parents' house that I never could sleep in. Every time I tried, I had restless nights where I woke up frequently to the sound of someone calling my name or whispering something unintelligible. I always blamed the busy wallpaper, coupled with the size of the room, causing me to be unable to rest my mind and thus experience these dreams. The most unpleasant dreams were those when someone opened the door to the room and would just stand in the door opening. The weird thing about those dreams was that the door was always opened inwards, whereas in reality, the door opened outwards, thus reaffirming that it must be a dream. Years passed and my parents decided to move and asked me and a friend to help with the move. We stayed in the small guest room and my friend had to sleep on a mattress on the floor. Even though it had been many years since I had actually slept in the room, I was anxious to do so. The realization that it would be the last time, combined with the fact that my friend was sleeping there as well, eased my mind somewhat, and I fell asleep quite soundly. When I awoke the next day, I was refreshed and ready for the move. My friend, however, looked like he hadn't slept at all. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me he'd been awoken by something trying to open the door throughout the night, but being unable due to his mattress blocking the doorway. He thought it might have been my father, but was afraid to ask. I reassured him it was all just a dream, since the door only opened outwards and not inwards. That was all he ever said of the matter. The move went well, and I'm glad to never see that house and that room ever again. During the fall and winter months when I was 17, I moved into a windowless room in my parents' basement. It was the end of my junior year, and I was stressed over my schoolwork, work, and everything else going on at the time, so sleep was tough to find. Every night about 2 or 3 in the morning, I would hear noise coming from my closet. The door was closed, but when I opened it, my clothes on the hangers would be swaying slightly. The closet had a single light on the ceiling, so it could shade downward. I looked through the clothes by pulling them apart, but nothing. This would happen every few days. It was driving me mad. I talked to my friends and they went into great detail about how it was a ghost and all the things I could do to catch evidence of it. I posted a motion sensing camera a friend lent me and faced it looking into the closet. And a few days later, it happened again, but the camera recorded nothing. I was giving up hope. So I took everything out of the closet and got some of the best sleep I've had in months. Once I rested and got tired of my parents asking me to clean my room, because it was a bunch of closet clutter, I put it all back. That night, it happened again. I searched the house for the most powerful flashlight I could find and set an alarm for 2 a.m. to catch whatever was in the act. 2 a.m., I wake and wait. While reading, I heard a noise. The hangers were moving and boxes had fallen. I turn in the flaglight and rush over to the closet, expecting anything. I search the closet, and I begin to feel hopeless. Some ghost is going to do this to me every free night, and there's nothing I can do. I sit on the ground a little scared, and not wanting to be in the dark, but I don't want to keep dealing with this. So I waited in front of that closet for half an hour. It's about 4 a.m. when my flashlight starts to fade. When I look up and see 2 glowing eyes looking down on me. My heart almost stopped, but then I realised what it was. It was my neighbour's black cat looking at me from between the hangers. All this time, she'd been climbing into my closet and lying across my coat hangers. She didn't move at all when I pulled the hangers apart. It was black, long and thin, so I couldn't see her unless I was looking for her, and she didn't make another sound. My biggest question was, how the hell did he get into the house and into my room? I watched her leave, and she entered a hole in the ceiling in the basement's unfinished bathroom. I listened to her travel from one side of the house to the other. She was getting in through the garage. I later found out she was going into the crawl space under the garage, into a hole in the wall behind some equipment, up a ladder into the attic and into the walls, somehow getting up and down between the house and garage, into the basement, through the hole, and into my open door while I slept. I moved the ladder, and the haunting stopped. Sorry if this wasn't a real paranormal story, but it's the closest I got to believing it was possible.